with a specialism for construction. So he's going to go into some detail about the Building Safety Act. Then we'll have insights from Scott, who is the Partner Enablement Manager at Click. This is going to be about how Click can help simplify your data. And then you'll hear from myself. So I'm Chrissy, the sector lead for construction at Cybit, with a keen eye for innovation and a deep understanding of the challenges that you guys are facing with regards to the golden thread. So I'm championing digital transformation within the sector. I've got expertise in leveraging data and analytics to empower construction firms to navigate these regulatory requirements and make it simpler for you. So you're going to hear from myself, Ross and Scott, and why the legislation is important and how Cybit can help, and the solution that we've developed to simplify your compliance for the golden thread. So a little bit about Cybit. We were founded in 1991. We're a managed IT service provider. We specialise in managed IT support, cybersecurity and data and analytics. I know cybersecurity is another hot topic within the industry. So we want to ensure to you guys and make sure that you know that your data and your information with regards to our solution is going to be in safe hands. I understand there's regulatory requirements, things like that. So I'll go into more detail the qualifications that Cybit have and the certifications that we have to show you that we are, a national company, and how we can actually help and keep your data safe. So some of our biggest customers, we've got Bellway Homes, Grimshaw Architects, Simpson Hoff. We work across industries and across sectors. So we do know, we have some expertise in the space, and we are talking to people like you and customers like you, and we're servicing customers who are the same as you and your peers. So some of our credentials. So I don't expect you to read all this slide. I do understand that it's, there's a lot of words on there, but I did want to highlight that we are ISO 2701 compliant. So that's an essential standard for managing information security risks, ensuring data protection, promoting business continuity, aids organisations in adhering to various regulations, and that enhances their reputation by showing strong commitment to information. We're certified with Cyber Essentials, which provides security against common cyber threats. It's actually a prerequisite for government contracts, of which we do also service. So we do have experience with public sector and police forces. So if you can imagine the types of data we're looking at for them, you can understand how seriously we take our cyber security. We're also a Click Elite partner. So today's webinar is done in partnership with Click. And again, you're going to hear from Scott in a minute. But what this means is that it's a high level of proficiency and success in implementing Click solutions, which means we've got a high level of proficiency and success in implementing our golden thread solution that we've developed for you to make everything easier and make your compliance easier. It also means that we've got improved market services, market distinction, and valuable resources, which means that we can get better pricing to you that you can't get from other providers. So next, I would like to hand over to Ross. So Ross works for Muckle LLP. As I said, he's a lawyer and an expert in all things Building Safety Act. So Ross has got some really interesting insights that he's put together to share. So I hope you'll find this productive and informative. So Ross, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks, Chrissy. Hi, everyone. So as Chrissy mentioned, I'll be running through the key areas of the Building Safety Act, as well as going into a bit more detail in relation to the golden thread principles and the information to be provided. So just a bit about myself and Muckle. So Muckle are a commercial firm based in Newcastle and Cumbria, but we have a UK and national reputation. We offer advice in respect of all aspects of commercial and business law, such as real estate, construction, banking and corporate. I myself am a partner in Muckle's construction engineering team. I specialise in non-contentious construction law and have over 10 years experience. And we do act for a wide range of different clients, from developers to contractors, design consultants, and also subcontractors on a wide range of projects throughout the UK. So in terms of what I'm going to go over today, given the time constraints, it really is going to be a whistle-stop tour of the Building Safety Act, because I know a lot of you here will be already familiar with some aspects of it, and it is a very long and detailed bit of legislation. But I will give a background history of the Building Safety Act, and then I'll just summarise some of the key areas, including high-risk buildings, the introduction of the new building safety regulator, the gateway regime, the new duty holder regime, and the extension of liability periods. I'll also then, towards the end, focus on the golden thread, the golden thread principles, and what information needs to be provided throughout the life cycle of a project. And then I'll wrap up with kind of a summary in terms of the Building Safety Act's impact on the construction industry as a whole. So in terms of the background, as you'll all be aware, the Grenfell Tower fire occurred in June 2017. It killed 72 people and over 70 were injured. As a result of that, the government commissioned an independent review led by Dame Judith Hackett. Judith Hackett published her report, the interim report in December 2017 and the final report in May 2018. As a result of that report, the draft Building Safety Bill was published in July 2020 and was given royal assent on the 28th of April 2022. The actual act came into effect at the end of June 2022, and then the full implementation took place by the 3rd of October 2023. So there has been a transitional period between the end of June 2022 and October 2023. So some projects have fallen into that transitional regime. For example, if an applicable relevant project to which the Building Safety Act applies, i.e. those relating to high-risk buildings, didn't have an initial notice served on or accepted by a local authority prior to the 1st of October 2023, the project falls under the scope of the Act. If, for example, the initial notice had been served prior to the 1st of October 2023 and the works are sufficiently progressed prior to April 2024, then that project would continue to benefit from the transitioning requirements. But that being said, given we're past October 2023, any new project that starts will come under the full effect of the Act. So in terms of the main aim and objectives of the Building Safety Act, and these include the following. So to ensure the safety of all buildings, introduction of a building safety regulator who's responsible for overseeing the safety and performance system of all buildings, but with particular focus on high-rise residential buildings, a new regulatory regime for the management and safety of high-risk buildings, and importantly, most importantly, ensure the safety of residents. And the main aim of the post-Grenfell landscape is to ensure that building safety risks and high-risk buildings are considered at each stage through a design and construction of a project. So it will start at planning and go through to construction, but also will include the occupation aspects as well. Skip one there. So the first key area that I'm going to go through is high-risk buildings. So the Act puts specific controls in place for high-risk buildings, and high-risk buildings are defined in the Act as those that contain at least 2 residential dwellings and are over 18 metres or 7 stories in height. So that will typically be high-rise apartment blocks, student accommodation. Hospitals and care homes will also be included. However, hotels are currently not included within the scope of the Act, as well as secure residential institutions and military barracks. So in practice, the new regime will apply to the following high-risk building work. So firstly, the construction of a new high-risk building that falls within that definition. Secondly, works to an existing building that causes it to become a high-risk building. So that might be adding stories to a building that was previously below 18 metres or 7 stories, or a building that undergoes a material change of use so that it becomes a high-risk building. So that might be the conversion of an 18-metre office block to become residential accommodation. And then thirdly and lastly, building work to an existing high-risk building. So that might be refurbishment or recladding works that are being undertaken to an existing high-risk building, and that would fall in within the scope of the Act. So as I say, the Building Safety Act is confusing it doesn't necessarily apply to all buildings. Some areas will apply to all works, but the regime relating to high-risk buildings is quite distinct and separate. So it will be key from a practical perspective at the start of a project to determine whether it falls into this definition, and especially if you're teetering on the edge of 18 metres or 7 stories, then you need to make sure, and contractors, developers, etc., need to make sure that the height is accurately measured. And in practice, there'll be 12,500 high-risk buildings coming into scope under the new safety regime, and that's in addition to 600 new buildings that will be developed annually. So the second key area to talk about is the introduction of the new Building Safety Regulator. And the aim of this is that the Building Safety Act sets out clear lines of responsibility for building owners, which are going to be reinforced by this new role of the Building Safety Regulator. And the Building Safety Regulator role will be undertaken by the Health and Safety Executive. And their role is to oversee the safety performance of all buildings, but the particular focus will be on high-rise residential buildings, and that will be through the entire life cycle of the project, from the planning and design stages through construction and into occupation. And a significant new step, which I'll come on to in the next slide, is the introduction of the major gateways, and these will act as hard stops in between each stage if not approved by the Building Safety Regulator. So as discussed, the gateway regime consists of 3 gateways. Gateway 1 is the planning phase. Gateway 2 is the design stage, and then Gateway 3 is the construction and completion stage. The gateway regime will only apply to higher risk buildings. So if you fall out with the definition of high risk buildings, then the gateway regime won't apply. And just going into the gateways in more detail. So Gateway 1, in relation to the planning phase, and requires applications for planning permission to include 5 statements setting out safety considerations specific to the development. The Building Safety Regulator would also be a statutory consultee to any planning permission as well. Gateway 2 relates to the design stage and replaces the deposit of plan stage at the building control process. So under this new gateway, before any person starts high-risk building work or a stage of high-risk building work, the client must submit an application for building control approval to the Building Safety Regulator. So Gateway 2 again is a hard stop in that construction cannot begin until approval has been received from the Building Safety Regulator. Gateway 3 relates to when works have completed. So for the purpose of Gateway 3, the regulator will assess the as-built building, whether it has been carried out in accordance with the building regulations. It will also ensure that no part of the high-risk building is occupied before it is safe. And this is another hard stop, and the building cannot be occupied or registered with the regulator until the regulator has granted the completion certificate. I think in practice there is potential for delays as a result of obtaining Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 approval. So again, the approval process needs to be programmed in from an early stage, and I think especially over the next few years, when parties get used to how the gateway stages will work in practice, then there could be some delays in projects. You know, Building Safety Regulator might reject some applications because information is missed. So I think there is just going to be sort of a settling down stage over the next two to 3 years. And also the information that's required as part of the 3 gateways will form part or a key component of the golden thread of information, which I'll come on to. So the next area and key area to discuss is the duty holder regime. And the aim of this is to promote the coordination of design work and building work by all key duty holders in a construction project. So that will include the client, all contractors, and all designers. And unlike the gateway regime and other aspects of the Building Safety Act, the new duty holder regime will apply to all building works, not just high risk building works, apart from a very small list of exemptions, which includes sort of temporary buildings, greenhouses, and small extensions to domestic property. And the duty holder regime imposes specific duties on clients, designers, and contractors. As I say, with enhanced duties applicable to high risk buildings. And the new regime also creates a new specific principal designer and principal contractor role to undertaken to ensure compliance with the building regulations. And the new principal designer and principal contractor roles are distinct to the same roles that are undertaken pursuant to the CDM regulations. So again, the responsibility on clients, designers, and contractors to be competent to ensure compliance and undertaking these roles. And again, in practice, well, it's important that any construction contracts being entered into will recognise the new duty holder regime and also recognise the relevant appointment of the principal designer and principal contractor. The new JCT 2024 contracts now actually expressly deal with the new duty holder regime, but if you're entering into older forms of building contract, then this will need to be addressed. So just going through some of the duties quite briefly. So taking the client, they must make suitable arrangements for planning, managing, monitoring a project. They must also enable the designers and contractors to cooperate with each other and provide a periodic review of the building work. So the duties are very much similar to those in the CDM regulations. So in terms of the principal contractor, they should take responsibility for the site, make arrangements to monitor the work, again, cooperate with the other parties, manage flow of information, etc. And again, the principal designer must not start work unless the client is aware of their duties, monitor competencies, make arrangements to monitor the building work with records to ensure that the design complies with all aspects of the building regs. There are also specific duties in relation to all designers and contractors. So, for example, a subcontractor undertaking works will be a contractor for the purpose of the regime, and likewise a design consultant undertaking design work will be a designer. So there will be specific duties on all parties involved in a construction project. And again, from a practical perspective, it's important to address any gaps in competency with training, review what these specific duties are, additional duties are, and whether they can be complied with. The market is still adapting. Many consultancy firms are still pushing back on undertaking these new principal designer and principal contractor roles. But I suspect once there's an element of familiarity with these roles and how they operate in practice, then organisations will feel a lot more comfortable. So just lastly on sort of the key areas are limitation periods. So historically under the Defective Premises Act, claims could be brought within 6 years of the works reaching completion. However, the Building Safety Act has extended these periods for 15 years for all claims going forward for dwellings completed after the 28th of June 2022, and 30 years for those dwellings completed before the 28th of June 2022. The 30 years retrospective period has been very controversial when it was going through Parliament and when it came into effect. And we are seeing a lot of claims being brought between 15 and 25 and 30 years ago. So defective construction and cladding product claims will have the same limitation periods as above. So 15 years prospectively, 30 years retrospectively. There will also be a right to claim by anyone for damage suffered due to misapplication or failure to apply the building regs to building works, and that will have a 15-year period. And I think the important point to note in this regard is that the first two bullet points apply solely to residential dwellings and buildings only. However, the third bullet point and a claim in relation to Section 38 of the Building Act will apply to all works and not just residential buildings. So just moving on to the golden thread. So as part of Judith Hackett's recommendation, she recommended that a golden thread of information should be captured digitally and should run through the building's entire life cycle. And this information must capture a building's data from the early design stage, during construction, and then occupation, and then including as well occupation of the building as well as any decommissioning. It includes an audible trail of accountability recording which decisions have been made, when and by whom, and it acts as a single source of truth for that building at all times, recording every design or decision or change made. And again, like the gateway regime, the golden thread principles and information to be provided will only relate to works in relation to a higher risk building. And I think in terms of the golden thread, this is why the Building Safety Act and golden thread goes far beyond fire safety. It affects everyone working in the building industry, from architects to consultants to contractors as well. The duty holders that I mentioned in the previous slide will play a key role in maintaining that information and adhering to the principles. And they should all work together as well to keep that information up to date and accurate as possible. So in terms of the principles set out in the Act, I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is digital. So information and data must be stored and transferred electronically. People will be, and organisations will be free to choose to implement the golden thread through digital systems to preserve maximum flexibility and encourage innovation. The information needs to be accurate and kept up to date. And it must be valid for when it's created and kept up to date as far as possible. Some information will only need to be accurate at the point it was created, whereas other information will need to be continually updated so it accurately reflects the building at that position, that point in time. For example, information and documents submitted as part of the application for Gateway 2 should accurately reflect the building at that point in its life cycle. However, as the building is constructed, other information will be updated to reflect developments such as change control records, and information kept in the golden thread must be relevant to ensuring compliance with the applicable building regs on managing the safety of the building. In terms of the third principle, single source of truth, so all relevant people working on the building must be able to access the same information, even when they're working on different systems, software or platforms. In other words, the golden thread must be interoperable. Secure. This is a really important one. So the golden thread must be a secure system so that sensitive information can be stored in it, which will operate as a single system. And then sufficient protocols must also be in place to protect personal information and prevent hacking and unauthorized internal access. So the golden thread information must be accessible. Information must be stored in a structured way and managed so people can easily find, update and extract the right information. The information must be understandable and consistent and appropriate for the use for the people who use the information. So people who input into the golden threads must be mindful that information needs to be understood and used by others. And then lastly, accountability. So one of the key purposes of the golden thread is to drive greater accountability. To this end, there must be an accurate, must be records in the golden thread of who inputs the information and documents into it, and when information documents are changed or updated. Alternatively, it must be clear from the information management strategy who's responsible for inputting information into the golden thread and how this will be recorded. So in terms of the golden thread information itself, so this will be information and prescribed documents required to be submitted to the building safety regulator as part of the approval application at Gateway 2, which I've previously discussed. There may be information relating to change control documents, mandatory occurrence reports, etc. throughout the project. I also discussed Gateway 3 and the completion of a building, so all relevant documents and applications submitted to the building safety regulator in that process will also be included within the golden thread of information. Any completion certificates, partial completion certificates issued by the building safety regulator will also be included, and any further information that's relevant to the ongoing safety of the building not covered by the materials listed above should also be included. And as I said on previous slides, it's the responsibility of the key duty holders, such as the client, principal and contractor, principal designer, for creating and managing the golden thread. In terms of, as discussed in the previous slide, that the parties have and should consider which digital tools and platforms to use. People have been using UK building information modelling and BIM, but again, the parties are free to choose whatever platform they use, as long as it complies with the regulations. And just moving into occupied buildings, so it's not just the planning, design, and construction in which the golden thread applies. Once the building's complete and it's occupied, the golden thread of information will continue. To ensure that building owners have the right documents, accurate evidence of the risk assessments and safety arrangements, as well as documentation supporting these. And just as you have duty holders through the design and construction of a project, once the building is occupied, you then have an accountable person, and they're responsible for building risk when the building is occupied. And that might be an individual, partnership, or corporate body. And there may be more than one accountable person, in which case there would be a principal accountable person as well. And they, as I say, they'll be responsible for the structural and fire safety of the occupied building. If, for example, there was a high-risk building that was undergoing refurbishment which was occupied, then the accountable person or principal accountable person would be involved in that process to ensure the golden thread is up to date and to manage any health and safety as well. So just wrapping up and looking at the impact on the industry as a whole. So I've put some words from Judith Hackett. And the Building Safety Act will fundamentally change the landscape for building safety, especially in relation to those high risk buildings. Non-compliance can result in very serious consequences. If, for example, a developer fails to obtain the building regulation certificate before occupation, they're considered as having committed a criminal offence, which can be up to 2 years in prison and/or a fine. There's also the introduction of building liability orders, which allow the court to extend liability for building safety breaches to companies associated with the original party at fault. So developers often create subsidiary companies or shell companies or special purpose vehicles for the sole purpose of carrying out development work. And then once the project's concluded, it's commonplace for developers to transfer any assets out of the subsidiary or shelf company or SPV to other parts of the business and look to dissolve the company. So in principle, these orders would result in a significant broadening of the potential liability exposure of past and future projects. Opens up the possibility for, say, associated companies who are not involved in the works to be held joint and severally liable, which I think is really key, and it's to prevent parties from escaping liability. As I say, the new gateway regime requires building safety regulator approval, and as we've discussed, this will increase the amount of red tape and additional hurdles that need to overcome throughout the life of a project. There will be an additional administrative burden which will need to be complied with, and all parties will need to be prepared for. As also discussed, there will be likely delays, especially in the next few years, because obtaining building safety regulator approval may prove difficult, or the wrong information may be submitted, which means applications are knocked back. But again, I suspect once people familiarise themselves with the regime and what information needs to be submitted, then this will settle down. From a legal perspective, I've mentioned the new JCT contracts which have been published, which deal with the new duty holder regime and the appointment of the principal designer and principal contractor to comply with the relevant building regulations. But the new JCTs, importantly, don't deal with expressly the Building Safety Act and high risk buildings. So if there are projects which involve high risk buildings, it's likely that you'll need to amend the JCT contract or any building contracts being entered into to deal with the specific provisions relating to high risk buildings in the Building Safety Act, and also in relation to the golden thread. So that very much was kind of a whistle-stop tour of the Building Safety Act and the golden thread. My details are here. I think there might be time for questions later, but feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ross. Really interesting insights there. And I think it's really important that we get this right, which is why the purpose of today's webinar with regards to the golden thread is why we think that we've got the perfect solution to help with all of this, and help you get your data in a secure digital way and make sure that you are compliant. And it's not just about being compliant, keeping yourself safe and your business safe, which is right. It's the fines, the reputational damage. Like, can you afford not to have this is the question. And the most important part is, how much is a human life worth? Because that's what ultimately this has come out of, and that's what you need to think about. So I would like to hand over to Scott now. Scott is the Partner Enablement Manager at Click, and he's going to provide an overview of how we can actually help your processes, how we can help get your golden thread to an actual golden thread, because I do know, speaking to other people, they've said, and I can quote them, they said it was a god-awful nightmare trying to get everything pulled together. So hopefully we can take some of that burden away from you and help you get your data into an amazing place, and then get actual insights from it. So Scott, if you'd like to take it away.
Yeah, Chrissy, can I just check you can see my screen as well?
Yes, I can see it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk about, as Chrissy said, how we as Click, in conjunction with Cybit, can actually help manage the challenges around the data and information that you've got available, and really organizing it and structuring that. So I'm going to talk for probably about 12 minutes or so, just to give you a feel for who Click are. And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and principles. So I'm not going to go into any specific great detail about how we do this, but I'll talk about some of the challenges, and I'll talk about some of the things that and making this a success in terms of adopting it, and all of the pieces that Ross so eloquently talked about in terms of how to get that information available, how to get it to as many people as possible, and how to get it to the right people at the right time as well. So if I just start a little bit with Click. So Click have been in business for over 30 years now. I've been with them for a little bit under 12 and a half years of that. And in terms of who we are, we're a recognized leader. In fact, I've just spent the last 3 days at the Gartner Data and Analytics event down in London. And we are a leader both in the ability to pull data from different tools and different places and different capabilities. And we're also a leader in surfacing that data as well. And importantly, and one of the key elements that Ross also touched on was, we're very good at, when we get that data, ensuring it's at a really strong and really viable quality as well. So just a little bit about Click. We're north of 3,000 employees, and we work with significant partners. You might ask, why do we work with partners? Well, as an organization, we provide really high quality tools and capabilities for managing your data, and also understanding and working with your data as well. But what our partners do is, our partners bring that real industry knowledge, industry understanding, and are capable to bring together a group of people to actually turn what is potential and capabilities in our software tooling and services that we provide into real life solutions. And if you look at the industries that we've, some of the reference customers that we've got there's 2 things that jump out to me. One is, we're not defined by a particular single industry space. So we've got people in all types of manufacturing, service provision, food provision, education provision, aircraft manufacturing, sports, central government. And within that, we work on a high volume of different types of solutions as well. So we're not defined by a particular solution space on there as well. And in terms of adoption within industries, we have a really good penetration of the largest companies out there in the world as well. So we do this for a whole size of different customers. So we've got, I think, around about 40,000 customers or so, from smaller customers all the way through to huge global brands as well. So just to give you a little bit of confidence that we know what we're doing here. In terms of what am I going to talk about today, and what can we add in terms of bridging the data that you have to the outcomes that you need. And that's really the purpose that we serve as a provider of software capabilities. And in conjunction and working with our partners, we make that really relevant to the challenges and problems that you actually have and try to make that easy. But in terms of what we found, and again, just linking back to what Ross said, in today's world, as a general point, there's more data available. There's more types of data available. It's collected from a lot more sources now, a lot more different places, and a lot more different kind of use cases, really. It comes from a lot of locations, and there's more people need access to data. So it's really important that when we get data, that we deliver that out as much as we can. And this last point is the one I like to talk about the most, because more risk really depends on who you are, what you're trying to do with that data, and how you really use and make that data available. And the risk can come in a couple of different ways. As a general principle, in lots of the industries I've engaged with, and lots of the organizations I've engaged with, the positive benefit comes when you can actually get that information to as many people as possible. The kind of flip side of that is the risk is if you can't get it to those people, or potentially the other side of the risk, which I don't think applies here, but is that you give inadvertent data, you give people access to data inadvertently, so you actually run the risk of potentially a data breach on there as well. But it's all focused on the outcomes. And how we do this is we take this through 5 stages, and I'm going to talk about each of these in terms of how we get from data and how we get to outcomes on there as well. So in terms of how we break it down, we split it into these 5 areas of moving the data, being able to make sense of it, trust it, which I think is imperative on this. You've got to trust your data, and you've got to have confidence of what you're doing. And especially for everything that Ross has said, I think there's 2 angles to this. I think there's one, being able to meet that regulatory compliance and being able to be confident that you can do that. I think the second aspect of that is trusting it to the point where you can start to use it to also get other benefits within your business as well. How can you start to leverage this, not just for a need to meet a regulatory requirement, but how can you turn that into a competitive advantage as well? And I'll talk about how we do the analysis of that, and that kind of leads into where you get potentially the chance to exploit that data, and then also how you do something with that as well. So I've got a simple block diagram that we'll just build, and I'll just work through these areas here. But if I look at what we do in the center of this, we have a target. Now, why do we put a target there? And the target can be on-premise platforms, it can be file stores, it can be data systems. But what we're finding more and more is that people are wanting to put their information into a cloud platform. So why is that? Well, the reasons for that is that the cloud platform, well, actually, why would you need this in the first place as number one point? Well, actually, in all the systems that you've got, whether that's material management systems, whether that's ERP systems, so enterprise resource planning systems, all of those systems are designed to help you run your business from a transactional basis. They're not necessarily designed for bringing together different data. They're not designed for supporting the ability to ask questions of that data, to analyze it, to understand it, because that requires a large amount of compute power. So by putting this into another platform that is designed to support that questioning of the data and that querying of the data, that's why we have a target system. And the cloud, the rise of the cloud providers, so people that you'll have heard of like AWS, Google, Microsoft Azure, they provide computing environments and database platforms, data warehouses, data lakes that really leverage all the benefits of things being in the cloud, so they can scale them, they're secured, and you can grow them and you can shape them as you want to. And where Click come into this is that we're really good at doing these 5 steps. So if we look at Move It, what do we need to do? We need to be able to scale that, because there can be quite large volumes of data on there. We need to have a huge volume of connectors and the ability to ingest data from lots of different places. One of the things that we find is that every customer we engage with has different systems, and even in some cases when they have the same systems, they've implemented them slightly different. So we've got a vast ability to collect and source that data safely, securely, and quickly within inside of your infrastructure. We also have worked with partners who specialize where data is captured potentially in a completely manual basis as well. So we have the ability, if you don't capture that data or you capture it in a paper forms, the ability to get that into be digital, which was one of the key requirements of the golden thread on there. Now, once we've got that data, and it might come from several different sources to meet the requirements for the golden thread, we have the ability to transform this. You might say, well, why do I want to transform the data? What do you mean by that? Well, we've got to deliver that data to this target platform on there. But what we might have to do is we might have to bring different data sources together. We might have to combine them. We might have to do some processing as it flows through. And that really goes to kind of the next point on this is when we get to trusting data. And I think this is a big box, because I think this is imperative when you're dealing with this, because the risk associated with having data that you don't trust is quite huge. So I'm going to talk about 3 points. I'm going to take them in the order of 1, 3, and 2. So I'm going to talk about lineage first. So lineage is when you've got this data and you've organized it and you've delivered it so you can start to look at it and report on it. Where did that data come from? What kind of journey has that been on? The second piece on the quality of this is, how can we look at the quality of this data? How complete is it? Is it in the format that you expect it to be? Is it within the range that you expect it to be as well? These are very physical things of the data quality on there as well. But the governance piece, we can start to look at how often is this data used? Where is this data used? Who's using it? Who should be using it? Have you got access to it? So that whole area around controlling and governance of that data is key as well. And then I'm going to talk about the final piece of this, the kind of area between the data and the target is all about moving the data, getting it into the right shape and getting it into the right structure for you to be able to use it and report on that. But the thing that bridges that and when we start doing the reporting is something called a catalog. So generally when we bring data together, we'll put that as the latest industry term is data product. Essentially, it's data in a form that you can understand it. And what do I mean by that? It's described correctly. You know what it is. The glossary is a great way of linking how you actually report on this and how you do analytics on that data, where you can define the terms and why do we do this? Why do we spend time doing that? Because you want people to adopt this and you want people, again, to trust it from the analytics side. If they can see when they're using a measure, so how compliant am I? How complete am I on my regulations? If you can describe how that's calculated and how that's built, that promotes better business processes, because then people can start to understand where they need to work on this, where they need to fix this as well. But if I just move quickly through the analytics side of this and how we really kind of expose that to people inside of your organization. We've been doing analytics for a long time. We're very good at it. We're very good at managing and reporting on and providing insights into massive sizes of data. But over time, we've evolved this so you can start doing things like ask natural language questions of this data as well and start to get information content for that as well. We can embed it into source systems. And one of the things that Ross said is that this needs to be available to lots of different people in all parts of the process as well. So what we can do is take this data that we've got, we can take some of the visualizations and representations of this data and start to embed it into other platforms as well as a product capability. There's been a huge buzz in the analytics space. I don't know how far this has gone into the construction space about how we use AI and ML. You switch on the news, you'll hear about AI, you'll hear about machine learning, you'll hear about all these kind of things. We have those capabilities in there. Practically, where could we apply this to? I think we could look at this using machine learning potentially to look at how on target am I be to be in compliance by a certain time period. So just to make it simple, to put it in terms and in context that you understand. And I'm just going to gloss over, we use AI in all elements of this process in terms of how we process data, how we understand the questions you're asking, how we translate those. But I want to get to this last part because this is where I think it's imperative that you actually understand what we can do with this. We can deliver reporting on this, so that can be periodic reporting every day, every week, every month, every quarter. But as you move forward with this, what we can also do is we can look at alerting. So what we can start to do is, rather than you have your people spend time in dashboards, we don't want that. The alerting allows us to start to manage the process by exception. So by defining business rules, when we get to certain points, we can alert in advance of something actually going out of control. By sending that through various channels, we can send that in emails, we can send that as reports, we can send that into things like Teams if you use that. So we can raise that kind of alerting on there as well. The automation is important as well. So if you spot something going off process inside of a dashboard, or you're driven to go and have a look at the dashboard to understand it, how do we then start the workflows and start the remedial processes to correct that as well. And collaboration is quite key as well. So how do we collaborate with that? So I've taken probably 2 more minutes than I said I would do, but this is where we can help. We're experts at getting hold of data, getting it in the right shape, helping you believe in that data, and then allowing you to start to use that. So I'm going to pause there, just so I do allow some time for questions. And Chrissy, if I hand back to you, if you want to just take control again.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Scott. We will have time for questions at the end. I can see that some people have popped them in the chat. So yes, we will definitely be able to have questions at the end if you just want to hang on. So I just want to sort of wrap up really quickly with the last few bits of the presentation that I've got, and just waiting for the PowerPoint slides to load. So when I've been out and about, I've been networking over the past year. I've been really researching heavily about the golden thread to understand the problem that you guys have been facing and what you've been solving. And when speaking to people across the sector, regardless of whether your building is high risk or not, advice I've taken from like the Chartered Institute of Builders, for example, has been that, and Ross touched up on this earlier, regardless of whether your building is high risk or not, it's best practice to follow the BSA 2022, because within the next couple of years, it's expected to apply to all buildings. There has been quotes within Dame Judith Hackett's report where she had said it felt like it was a race to the bottom at the moment. There's it's going to be a cultural shift. People are like, well, whose responsibility is it? What I would say is it's everybody's responsibility to speak up. If you know something isn't right, you need to speak up, you need to act on that. And if we can help give you the insights and the facts to be able to do that, then it's worth it as far as I'm concerned. So what we've done at Cybit is we've developed a solution. Basically, it's a product, and it's a SaaS product. One of the questions I had, so I want to reiterate this, is I understand with regulation that your data cannot necessarily leave the UK. So when we talk about building a data warehouse, going into cloud, we've got on-prem solutions, but if you do opt to go into cloud, your data will be held in the UK. The data warehouses, there's one in Ireland and there's one in London, and they're building more in the UK. I think they're building one across the road from our offices in Newcastle. So that is something that I do want to reiterate, like your data is safe, it will be regulated, and it's what we do. So one of the crucial parts of compliance for the golden thread is to centrally hold and store your data. So what we propose to do is that we will implement a data warehouse, and it would either live in the cloud or on-prem. Then we'll assess your data landscape. So this is identifying your key data sources and then integrating them into a centralized repository, which then allows access to only authorized personnel, which I think is important as well for you to know that nobody who you don't want is going to get access to your data unless you say they're allowed. So, I want to reiterate how safe it would be. If you opted for, it creates a single source of truth. So it ensures data consistency, it ensures reliability as well. So like Scott touched upon before, we're pulling data from all different sources. That might be Excel, it might be Autodesk, it might be CAD, it might be BIM. You might use all of these. You might use NBS Chorus, for example. All of these systems have got APIs. They've, I've done research into this where they've got connectors. So we can pull all that information, we can standardize it, we'll make it consistent, we'll make it reliable. Then when it's in your data warehouse, it's extract, transform and load. So it processes it, cleans the data, and then enriches it for analysis. Regular data updates are populated within the data warehouse, and then that's how you keep your golden thread as a living, breathing document, because it's populating the warehouse with fresh information. We will then integrate this data warehouse with Click, which is your BI platform. So not only are you going to have to do this because of compliance, but at least you're going to get insights out of it. And this is going to create interactive dashboards, visualizations, reports. We'll connect it with things like NBS, linking your data warehouse to ensure that you've got up-to-date lists of compliant parts, for example. We can link with CSCS and link that into your data warehouse so you can see at a glance your compliant personnel. You can create KPIs, you can see predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. You can use it for all kinds of golden thread information. You could use it for accident reporting on site, for example. And this isn't just data going forward, so we can use your existing data sources now and still pull it together, and then we can standardize it. Because historical data needs to be loaded, then you can see where your gaps are, which again, it's essential for the golden thread. So I've got a visual representation here. I don't know how well you can see it, but it sort of shows how it works. So there's all your systems there, your Autodesk, your BIM, for example, Excel spreadsheets. You put it into your data warehouse, which again, stored in the UK. So I just want to bring that home. Then the extract, the transform, the load happens. That's where the magic happens to bring it all together. So really quickly, last couple of slides, we're nearly there. The benefits to you guys is that we will take all of that pain away. So we'll integrate a data warehouse with Click, which will allow users to create interactive dashboards. This benefits you because it's a big tick in your golden thread of compliance. We ensure that your compliance data, your fire safety certificates, your material specifications, just for example, they're consistently tracked and linked to the right project at the right time. You get real-time insights. You get predictive analytics, efficient audits. So during audits, the golden thread of compliance can be easily traced, which reduces audit time and ensures accuracy and quality control as well. So you're not ending up with non-compliant things on a snag list. You're reducing your reportable occurrences as well. So, you're not risking a fine if a fire bar's been moved and it's not in the right place. And then if you do want to make changes, you can use that to forecast budgets and how much it's going to cost and decide, is it worth it? So, I think the benefits, that there aren't really any cons to doing this. It's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, and it's going to save lives, basically. So if you have no data capture and no system in place, you might think, well, I'm just using Excel, I'm not using anything. We can provide a data management solution. We can provide a platform for capturing, storing and managing this data in a structured and digital format. We can point to partners who also do this for you. And then again, with our data warehouse, we can capture your historical data. So, at the moment, this legislation's being put upon you, and you're not really being given the guidance or the processes, and everyone's that I've spoke to has been in a bit of a, I'm not quite sure. So we're taking that pain away from yourselves, and we're saying, come to us, we've got the process, we've done the research, and it's in place. So for your company, to summarise, we will help with your compliance. We'll build you a data warehouse so that your data is stored digitally, securely within the UK and with an easily accessible format to authorised personnel. We can then extract the data from your existing systems or provide you with a platform to be able to do the data capture. We can then transform it so that the data is standardised and loaded, and then you can extract enable meaningful insights. We'll create automated alerts with impactful changes, not just to the BSA 2022, but impactful changes to the business. And then on top of that, we'll put Click on, and Click will deploy that, and Click will be able to help in the way that Scott's mentioned and alluded to before. It's what we do. It's what we've always done. We bring data together, and this isn't anything that we haven't done before. It's just within the construction industry, you haven't had to digitize really in a way that you're having to do now. So let us take that pain away and let us help you. And then before we hit the questions, I do want to say why it's not just fines and reputational damage and prison that you think about. The whole reasoning behind this is because 72 people did lose their lives, and we're committed to advancing industry standards to enhance the safety measures to ensure the well-being of communities. Because I think everybody has the right to live safely, and that's the most important thing. So I will ask again, it's something, can you afford not to do this, is the question you need to ask at the end of the day. And nobody else seems to be doing what we're doing in the way that we're doing it, which is why we are the industry leader and the thought leader. So thank you all for your time. I want to say huge thanks to our speakers. I know there are a couple of questions that we've seen. There is time for more questions. We've given about 10 minutes if Ross and Scott don't mind sticking around, and we'll see some questions in the chat. So I'll ask those now. And then if anybody has any further questions, please feel free to jump on, interrupt, put your camera on, unmute. We do want to see your faces. We want this to be interactive. And thanks once again. So the first question was asked by Sean Sinclair, and this is one for Ross, I think. So what Sean said is, who would be responsible for any delays when the BSR reject applications due to insufficient design information, or if the BSR does not meet relevant timescales for approvals? Would this be contract dependent?
So yeah, it would be contract dependent, but just taking the JCT contract as an example, one of the relevant events in there that's already in there is delay in receipt of any permission from a statutory body. So it's likely that the employer would take that risk. So in effect, a contractor would be entitled to additional time if there was a delay from the building safety regulator. But what we're potentially seeing, and what I think we will see, is specific provisions in JCT contracts that expressly deal with delays caused as a result of the building safety regulator approval. And that's generally how we're seeing it being operated really at the moment.
Well, thank you. Sean's followed that up and said, is that just time only, or will there be associated costs?
It's time only, but I suspect as well, I'll expect contractors to maybe include it as a relevant matter, and maybe amend the existing JCT so that then costs can be recovered for those delays as well. But again, that is contract dependent, but I have seen contractors asking for both time and money in relation to such delays.
Great, thank you, Ross. There's one other question for you. Marcus Francis has asked. He said, you mentioned the most up-to-date JCT contract includes provision for the new duty holder rules within. Do you know if this is extended into the NEC contract?
It hasn't yet, given that the new NEC contracts of NEC 5 is nowhere near to be published, but it's important to note that these existing contracts will already have obligations to comply with statutory requirements, so there will be ongoing obligations to comply with the new regime, but ultimately the contract won't deal with who's going to be appointed as the relevant principal designer or principal contractor for those building regulations. So in an NEC contract, unlike JCT, which has been amended and the new JCT deals with it, amendments might need to be made to the NEC to point out who's actually going to be undertaking those roles.
Fab, thank you. I think I'll take this next one, but Scott, you might know the answer to this as well. So Richard Egerton has asked, with project-based data collection agreed in advance, how much is this happening now, and how far down the supply chain is that reaching? Richard, what I'll say from my experience is, at the moment it's not really, it's happening, but people are unsure as to how much data that they need to collect in advance, and down the supply chain, I think it's not happening. I think the manufacturing's more ahead in regards to the digital transformation, like people I'm speaking to within the manufacturing silos, because they've had to be. But with regards to it sort of filtering down from a golden thread perspective, it's not really reached there much, because I think the construction side of it is a bit behind in order to know what they need and what it is they want. I think because it's been so ambiguous. Scott, I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, so I was going to answer it from a very general purposes that, or a general principles purposes, that there's, I think there's an opportunity potentially with the data captured with the golden thread to start to combine that with some of your own data potentially as well. So I talked a little bit about moving from kind of regulatory compliance to how you can extend that. And I think if you were looking at some of the aspects of this, as I understand it, is it may identify areas that you need to work on to become compliant, and potentially those could you could start to look at your own supply chain internally on that and start to make decisions that are not necessarily directly regulatory impacting, but also look at how you optimize your supply chain to maximize that compliance as well. I don't know if I've answered the right question with that on there, Chrissy, but it was just the idea that you meet the compliance requirements, and then if you start to add additional data to that, you get further insights into your business, and where we found value for organizations and where we find things that really help them in all sorts of different ways is just being able to understand what they require for those where you need in your supply chain in terms of materials to meet the requirements on that. So, for example, we've done that with not the same thing, but with disaster relief agencies that we've worked with on a charity basis. When they have events to react to, they need to look at their supply chain. So it can help from that perspective.
Fab. Thanks, Scott. I've also been asked if there is a working example of our solution that we can see. Not yet, Michael. It's in the works. So we do have prototypes. So I'm more than happy to jump on it and show people a demo and organise that going forward. If you want to contact me at the end, I'd be happy to do that. We are at Digital Construction Week on the 5th and 6th of June in London, by which case we'll have a full up and running demo for you. So thank you for your question. One of the golden thread principles is that it needs to be accessible. How will information for residents be accessed, keeping in consideration challenges such as low levels of technology skill and English as a second language? So that's from Bill Holden. Scott, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah. So I think with that, Bill, once we've collected the information, there's the ability to then summarize and aggregate that. We see this as a big requirement in a lot of organizations. And again, I'm using a kind of parallel example for this, but around things like corporate social responsibility. I forget what the latest acronym is for that. But quite often organizations will want to publish that information and allow people to explore that information. Generally, if you were providing this, I think to residents, you probably wouldn't give them full access to this, but you probably either aggregate or summarize that data to a level that gives them comfort about what they're doing on there. The interesting aspect around the low level of technology skills, where we tend to put that is generally most people are familiar with the idea of websites. I know some of the older folks can manage that. I think the other aspect of this is when you've got multiple language capabilities on there. When we do visualizations and when we do representations on those, we tend to make them as simple and as consumable as possible, especially in these types of applications. So handling the multiple language piece, quite often if we embedded that into a publicly available website or even a kind of gated access to this website for residents, we'd be able to represent the information in a graphical form that kind of transcends a little bit to a degree the language aspects of that. But also if you had a website, you can actually have multiple different languages for that website with supporting and explaining information. So I go a little bit back to when I was looking at this at the internal use cases. The more you can describe this in simple terms, the more accepted and adopted it would become as well. So my suggestion would be is the core data is collected for the purpose of managing the compliance from the golden thread area. And again, Ross, jump in if there's some requirements that I'm not aware of on there. But if you want to source this out to residents to access as well, then potentially what I would suggest providing a subset of that information, providing it through something like a website that's either publicly available or gated, and then using visualizations and different kind of language page selections on that website to manage that as well. But Ross, I don't know if there's anything else from a regulations point of view that would need to be met there.
No, nothing further on that from my perspective, Scott.
Right. I've got two more questions. So one is from Marcus Francis. He said, out of curiosity, should an organisation have an individual registered as a BR principal designer? Would that person be liable for any non-conformance subject to enforcement, or would this lie with the business?
In the JCT contract, you'd name an individual as part of an organisation, but ultimately the non-conformance would lie with the business and not the person, because ultimately the insurance and the professional indemnity insurance lies with the business. So if there was an issue, then it wouldn't lie with the individual.
Thank you. Thanks. And the last questions come from Ian Ellis, and he said, thank you for your kind comments. Ian said it's a very concise and useful webinar. And will we be providing CPD certificates? Ian, I'll take this offline with you at the end. So everybody else, thank you for your time. I will be reaching out to everybody. Come and see us at our stand at Digital Construction Week on the 5th and 6th of June. But if you would like to take this further, I'll be reaching out with my contact details, see if we can have more of a conversation and see how we can help get your golden thread started and help you with your digital transformation. And huge thanks again to Ross and Scott for your time today. It's been really useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Sean. And if anybody's got any follow-up questions as well, please feel free to ask.
Chrissy, Ross, I was just going to drop off of that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thanks again for your time.
All right, no worries.
Much appreciated. All right.
Thanks,
Have a good day.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
Thanks. I'll
Bye.
speak to you
Bye.
soon. Bye.